Venetia Scott, welcome to Show Studio.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with a big question, and it's probably a very hard one to answer. It's what makes a great fashion image?
Great fashion image. Something that makes you stop when you're reading the magazine, I guess. You're flicking through and very often nothing stops you, and then you come to something that's arresting and pulls you in and maybe confronts you or affects you in some sort of way.
So it has to have emotion?
For me it does. To grab me in it does, but not for everybody. I think other people are more interested in the clothing and the silhouette and the fabrics. That hasn't ever been my first love of fashion imagery.
Yeah, you've said before in interviews that it's perhaps mood rather than trends or rather than clothes that interests you. Tell me more about that.
Well, I think I start with a character or narrative. I start with the casting, with an imaginary character, and then I'll cast somebody who I think will fit that and be able to portray that. And then I get the clothes, and the clothes will be used to tell you more about the character. So something like the pair of shoes she's wearing is really important, or what bag she carry, or whether she would carry a bag. I'll sort of approach it in a way that you might approach doing a film or a short film.
It's interesting because I want to go back and ask about sort of your earliest life, and I wonder, were you always interested in fashion or were you always interested in characters?
I think I was aware of fashion because my parents were very fashionable and sort of glamorous and always dressed up and would dress for dinner every night and be very sociable, and so it was always something that I had at home. And me and my sister were always dressed in long Laura Ashley dresses and Afghan coats and quite extreme fashion. But I think I was drawn, sort of attracted to the imagery more than the industry of fashion magazines. So I was sort of lost in my own imagination a lot as a child. I went to a boarding school, which was probably the most boring place on earth. So a lot of time was spent in a sort of imaginary world and not being present.
That's interesting. So do you think that's where that love for characters came from? It wasn't necessarily from sort of reading or films, it was from characters that you invented almost for yourself?
Yes, I think so. I don't think it was through, people grew up and a painting has kicked off their imagination. I think mine was very internal because there was nothing going on apart from going for a walk at the weekend in a group of 4. There was no town life. We couldn't really leave the grounds for 10 weeks apart from 1 week in the middle, so you had to have quite a vivid imagination.
And tell me, what were your ambitions when you were a young person? Did you think about jobs or anything like that, or were you very much in that kind of boarding school world?
I had an idea that my first idea was that I would buy an island in the Hebrides or Outer Hebrides, and I'd be self-sufficient and I'd farm and I'd have grey horses and ride around side saddle with long dresses on with my friends. And then at about 13, I think maybe I met a friend of my mother's who was the Vogue living editor, and so from about the age of 13 I wanted to work at Vogue.
Was that something your parents supported? You said that they were very fashionable people. Did they encourage you to kind of pursue the arts?
Yes. Yeah.
And tell me a bit about Vogue, because I'm endlessly fascinated by the fact that you were there, because I think, from a very simplistic perspective, most people wouldn't associate your aesthetic and your work with Vogue, but also the impact Vogue had on your life, because is it the case that you did give up a place at university to go work at Vogue, is that correct?
No, I had a job at Vogue, so I just decided not to leave the job and go to university.
And what was it that kept you there?
I loved everything. I loved the fact that it said Vogue House. I liked walking in there and the letterheading and the style. It was so stylised at that time. And there were very strong women and strong editors at that time. There was Grace Coddington, Liz Tilberis, Sheila Wetton, Beatrix Miller was the editor, who was sort of forceful, witty, quick. They were all, and Lucinda Chambers was there. So they were all sort of role models. I wanted to be in that world. I didn't want to go back and be in a sort of normal life. I was very, very happy in that environment. So
just like the island, it was kind of an escape in some ways then?
Yes. I mean, it was sort of a taste level which I hadn't experienced before. It was sort of, you just had white lilies from Pulbrook and Gould, and you had your dry cleaning done at Lilliman and Cox, and there was a whole language there which you went for lunch at Cicconi's, and it was a very rarefied time. And then at the end of it, everyone was dressed in Azzedine Elia. It was very disciplined. It was a sort of whole new thing for me.
And did you like the aesthetics or the designers that Vogue was talking about and championing?
Yes, because Azzedine was a big thing then. Bodymap had just started, and Culture Shock. There were new designers, and then there was Margaret Howell. So there was lots of different aesthetics at the time. There was Bruce Weber doing all the shoots with girls in herringbone tweed coats with flowers in their hair, and then there was sort of very minimal Azzedine aesthetic, and then there was the bodycon, Bodymap type thing.
And how did you used to dress?
In Azzedine.
Always?
Actually, when I first went there, I was more of a Margaret Howell girl, and then, yes, when Elia clothes started coming, and I think Brown started stocking them, and I had a bit of money, then I was head to toe.
And tell me a bit about your trajectory there, because you didn't start doing styling, it was the advertising department that you got kind of your first route in, didn't you? So tell me about how your trajectory went, because in the end you were assisting Grace Coddington.
Yes. I started working as a secretary for the girls that sold advertising space.
Sure.
And then I moved over to the editorial side. I worked with Beatrix Miller for about a year as her PA, and then I actually worked for Sophie Hicks, Edie Campbell's mother, as her assistant, and then I worked for Grace after that.
And tell me about working for Grace. That must have been an amazing experience.
Yes. It was amazing.
Has it impacted how you style?
I don't know if it's affected the style, but I think her perfectionism's probably rubbed off, and attention to detail, and learning lots of little tricks. But I don't think that... I remember one of my early shoots was White Shirts, which was definitely a sort of rip-off of Grace's shoots, but then quite soon after that I left Vogue, when she left Vogue, and I sort of reacted to my experiences there.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was very interested when I sort of was poring over past interviews you'd done, and a lot of people tried to get to the root of your aesthetic, and they labelled it as kind of anti-fashion, obviously, which we'll talk about later. But I think I found it interesting that you did cite that departure from Vogue as part of the reason, because in a way it was kind of it wasn't a choice to leave. You know, Grace moved to America, so there wasn't a job left for you. And did you feel was there a sense of sort of, were you a little bit angry about it? Was there an attempt to wanting to deliberately?
No, not at all. I felt sort of the immediate thing, having been so safe there, I felt, you know, it's sort of you're out on your own suddenly. So when you're calling up, you're saying it's Venetia Scott, and they say from which magazine, and you go, I'm freelance now, and you get passed around. So there is that initial sort of finding your feet again. It wasn't a reaction against anything, really. It wasn't anti anything. It was, I think I'd been in an institution from a very young age, and then in a way Vogue was another institution, and I loved it at Vogue, and I felt very safe there. But when I came out of it, I did want to do something different, and I wanted to celebrate a different type of woman, a different girl. And I remember seeing Larry Clark's book, Teenage Lust, and just feeling that's who I want to be. I want to be in the waterfall, in the sunshine, and have blonde hair and a round face and dance. And, you know, it was sort of wanting to get rid of all the repression, I guess, that I'd grown up with for a long time.
Tell me more about that sense of, because it seems like there is a fine line between kind of the safety of Vogue and the repression of being at a boarding school. Were you kind of, did Vogue feel a little bit like being at school still, you know?
In a good way.
Yeah.
All the good things about being at school, that that friendship and that support and collaboration. It was non-competitive, I think, when I was there. Everyone was close. It was very close. Camilla Nickerson was there, who became one of my closest friends. So it had the good bits of feeling like, also there were a lot of women there, and I'd been to an all-girls boarding school, so it was nothing negative. It was more just my life sort of just changed, and I was excited about something else. I was excited about this new sense of freedom and breaking out from you know, and being freelance, which was frightening, but it was liberating as well.
So just going back to, I'm interested that you said the word repression. Were you not very happy at school?
No, it wasn't my happiest moment.
Just because everything was too controlled?
I went there at 7, which I think is very early. And it was very different then. It wasn't, nothing was laid on at weekends. There was nothing to do. It was very, very strict. We'd be shut in the bathroom, you know, in the dark, when it was just too young and too far away from home. Not a good time.
No, I can sense that. I ask though because I think, you know, in a very beautiful way, some of the themes that, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, that I imagine came from being at a boarding school and being in that environment. Things like youth and sensitivity and puberty and loneliness and escaping are themes that I think run through your work. Is that conscious? Do you think that you project yourself and those experiences onto the girl, or is that just something that's innate?
I think there's a sense often of melancholy, or there's a sort of sometimes an emotional sadness, which maybe the melancholy maybe comes from that, but the other side is trying to break free of, it was the idea of breaking free of status things, and just that sense of running and being, you know, the wind is always a thing for me in pictures, the idea of wind on your hands and often the countryside and wide open spaces and the feeling of light. I think that's the girl. Maybe she's a mix.
So tell me, back to your trajectory a little bit, tell me a bit about when you first went freelance and you talked about kind of how exciting it was but scary at the same time. Who was it that you were on the phone to? Who were you wanting to work with? What were the earliest kind of relationships that formed at that period in your career?
What was that, sorry?
When you first left Vogue and you'd just gone freelance, who were the calls, who were the magazines you were ringing up? Who were the photographers that you started working with?
Well, the Face and ID, Lei and Per Louis, the Italian magazines, Arena. I worked with Michel Haddy, and then I met Jürgen quite soon after I left Vogue, and then that began. We worked together for 14 years, so.
Tell me about that, because that's an amazing collaboration.
Yeah, that was a sort of extraordinary thing to be really living pretty much 24 hours a day with someone over a long time. Having that exchange of ideas and that understanding of the language, each other's language, and I think we both brought very different things, because I would I'd have an idea and I'd find the location and I'd generally do the casting and get the clothes, and then sort of almost give that to him, and he would bring something completely fresh to it and give it life and throw it off. So it wasn't too. I think if I'd been doing photographs then, it would have been too. I wouldn't have had the confidence to have done it.
And do you think that you both did have quite different references, even if you had similar sort of sensibilities? I think we were both coming from the same place, really. Tell me more about that.
Well, were we coming from the same place?
It's a bit like therapy sometimes, these interviews.
Yes.
You kind of work out where you go.
I don't know, it felt as if we were, I mean, we probably had, obviously we had different backgrounds. I'm not sure that his childhood was the easiest time either. Maybe that, you know, we both had that. But, don't know, when we met, it was just an exciting time in fashion, and we were excited about making images together and travelling together. We went to Romania a couple of weeks after we met and took a car and a suitcase of clothes, and just the two of us drove around Transylvania and found people along the way and to photograph. And we always had projects on. It was there was always some shoot that we were discussing or talking about. So no, it's a very unique and great, exciting time.
It must be strange in some ways, because I think at that point you must have been developing your own aesthetic so much and kind of working out what you were about and what you stood for. Was it ever hard to do that when you were collaborating so closely with another person?
No, because I think we just brought something to each other, and so my bit would be very much in the beginning of setting it up, almost setting up the scenario, and then he'd come in and photograph it. There wasn't really any discord at all in it, actually.
And tell me, it seemed you implied before.
I do think in the end he needed to find his own. He needed to find his own voice and not have these stories brought to him. And I think that was a reaction to us working closely. I think he had to break out of that and break out of having to try and convey what I wanted him to say in a way, and he'd take it in a different way anyway. But I think when we stopped working together, you can see more him finding his voice, which isn't quite the same voice as we had when we worked together.
And tell me, it's interesting, you just said their stories. You said I'd bring these stories to him, and I'm interested in that. Would you, because you said, it is about the girl, it's not necessarily about the clothes, but would it be as extensive as you'd almost come up with a story for her, a narrative for her? Yeah. And where would that come from? Would you sit and kind of, would it be quite innate? It would just come to you, or would you sit and spend time trying to come up with an idea? No.
I do. It still goes on now. You're thinking at the beginning of the season, you've got to have some ideas, but you can't really sit down and think of an idea. I think I try and almost think about nothing and just see what happens.
And would it ever be sparked by a piece of clothing, or does it tend to?
Yes, no, definitely. It's definitely been sparked by watching a Miu Miu show or watching a Dolce & Gabbana show in the past, for sure.
Is it often?
It can definitely come from a catwalk show, but it might just be one girl who comes out and she just triggers off something, and then it snowballs into a different story. So it wouldn't be really the clothes that would excite me. It would be one girl who suddenly, for me, is interested and can take me on a journey.
And do you think about sort of what sense of femininity you're trying to put across? Is it about trying to show that you can be lots of different types of girl, or is it about? I
think I just have two types of girl, and when I was styling, I had two portfolios, and one was the girl really who I wanted to be, who was generally blonde with blue eyes and this round face and this openness and this sort of ease and lack of inhibitions. And then the other girl was maybe more like me, and it was a bit more sort of rigorous and often I know she was more the dominatrixy type girl. The other one was, but then I feel like I have both sides, and I think clothes are exciting for that reason, that you can wear jeans and you can forget about having anything on in a way. You can sit on the pavement and roll around in the dirt and it doesn't matter, but you can also dress for a dinner and the power that you can play it can give you strength as well. Wearing a great dress or playing with sort of power, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like the clothes were always a kind of accessory to the girl. They were something that let her sort of transform herself or enhance an aspect of herself or escape herself, but they were never kind of what was leading her. Is that right? Yeah. And tell me a bit, because I'm interested, it seemed from what you said before that you never consciously were trying to be anti-fashion or go this way while the rest of the fashion pack was going that way. But I think, looking back, that's kind of what's been written into history. People talk about it like it was, so pivotal and so influential. Did you get any sense of that at the time?
Not really. I definitely got a sense that something was going on, and the teams were all working individually. I was working with Jürgen, and Melanie was working with David Sims and with Corinne. And then collectively there was a sort of movement that happened, even though I think we all maybe came from a different direction. And I remember they used to have these festival of fashion photography, and we'd all be flown to Biarritz or Monte Carlo, and we were young then, and there was a feeling of excitement about being this new thing, and we were called La Nouvelle Vague Anglaise by, I can't remember, one of the French magazines, and it felt like we were turning things over, and it felt as if we were doing something quite radically new, but it wasn't in reaction to something that existed. It was just a new thing, and what was great about it was it didn't have a reference to any decade that had been before. It was a new look. It was had these long skirts on and big army coats and long hair. I think we looked like these sort of Amish people, and then there was a sense of rebellion and breaking down the hierarchy, and I remember going to Margiela shows where there were no seats and everyone had to sit on the floor, and seeing the editors coming in sort of from American Vogue, and there was no chair that was brought out. They had to sit on the floor, and that was exciting.
Did you intend your work to be sort of political in any way? Because I think that sense of it not being about the luxury of fashion and not being about sort of the money and the clothes, that has a political message and it has been read politically, but was that part of the intention?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it was about... I mean, it was an intention to let go of status symbols and status bags and sort of an ostentatiousness. It was a decision to get down to much more bare, raw things and not have the artifice of makeup, a lot of makeup and accessories and things that covered you up, or heels, or things that sort of... It was about paring things down. So in a way you'd wear heels if you wanted to have power, but you wouldn't have the feeling that a woman is going to be able to walk less easily and wobbling around on a pair of heels. It wouldn't diminish her power. It would be, you'd wear them because you wanted to have that sort of height or power or feeling of it gave you, or sexiness, instead of feeling like... Sometimes I watch shows and it looks like the shoes are too high for the girls. I hate that, when they can't walk properly. I sort of think, why are you doing this to women? What are you sort of... you're not enhancing life, or bad energy.
I think that's what I say when I ask if it's political. As also, I think just the vision of women that it put across was more progressive and more accepting and more real in some ways, even though there was all those stories and all that sense of fantasy. Was that important to you, that people could sort of still feel inspired by the image and still see something aspirational, but they could also identify with it?
Yes, I think it was about having contact with the girl. When you looked at the story, you had a real feeling and contact with the girls, which you maybe hadn't had earlier on. You didn't feel them so immediately. Someone like Kate touched you, and you maybe wanted to be her, but she touched you. Her energy and her character touched you. And I think with other girls that we used, they maybe projected something to the person looking, and they touched something.
Talk to me a bit more about the casting, because that's something that you have really become known for, is picking girls who perhaps wouldn't have appeared in fashion editorials, but also sort of picking girls who later became massive models. What is it that you look for in a girl? Can it be anything? Because you don't really have a type, I don't think.
I'm looking normally for the specific girl for that project. So I think I do have a type of girl, but each project is different. So it's sort of finding somebody. It's almost like casting for that job, who will play that girl. But obviously you need to have somebody who's also going to have the character that's going to let you in, and they're going to trust you, and they're going to connect with you, and you're going to sort of love them. And sometimes when I'm photographing now, I can feel, I sort of think, right, we've got that moment of focus and connection, and I find it very difficult if I don't like pretty much impossible if I don't like the person in front of the camera.
It's interesting. Does this this is kind of jumping forward a bit, but this way of working, it must be just harder and harder now. I think, you know, when I've read interviews that you've done, you talk about spending kind of weeks or even a month on shoots, and spending a lot of time, as you say, you know, getting to know the girls. It must be very hard to kind of work in that way now, because the pace of fashion is so different.
Yes, I mean, I try not to. I think it's very easy to say everything's got faster, but we are freelance and we can choose the pace that we go at. So I just choose a very slow pace, and now because I'm doing the photographs and I'm doing the editing afterwards, and I'm with the printer, and then I'm with the retouching guy, my process is 3 weeks on a shoot. And so if I can't get time on the girl that I want, I won't do the shoot. I'll wait until she becomes available. I think people are charging around too much, and the girls are working too much. The girls are in one country one day, one in the next day. So, but I think you have to just, you know, it's our responsibility to slow it down and not to say, oh, it's all crazy now, you only get the girl for a day. I think you have to find another way then. If you can't get this girl for more than a day, then you say to the agency, well, I can't shoot unless we have 2 days or 3 days. And then normally they'll say, okay, you have them for 2 or 3 days. Or you work with someone that's not known, and then they're going to have time on their hands.
I think it is harder though, isn't it, because of that pace, and I think you're right about taking responsibility, but I think it is harder to feel much emotion in things, whether that's shows or whether that's imagery, because they're not created in ways that allows for much emotion. And it's interesting that you were saying, you know, the fashion imagery you love is one that...
But you have to make that relationship with the girl. Sometimes, especially when I was at Nova, I would be casting and I'd talk to models and say, that's a great shot, who did it? And they'd say, oh, I'm so bad with names, I can't remember. I think you spent a day with this person. How can you not remember their name? How did you not have a relationship with this person? Or even more so with the photography, you'd say, she's great, who's that? And, oh, I'm so bad with names, I can't remember. But maybe, you know, maybe if they're just showing the clothes and that's what they want to do, then they can do it. Have a body and put some clothes on them, and you don't need to have that relationship. But that's not what interests me at all.
You mentioned Nova there, and I do want to ask a bit more about being at that title, because you were fashion director there, and you know, I think that was an amazing magazine, you know, and a really political magazine, to go back to what we were talking about before, and broke a lot of boundaries. And just tell me about the experience of working there.
Well, it was a good opportunity because there was Vogue, and then there were things like The Face and ID, and this was a magazine that was starting where they said, okay, come on board, you can commission who you want, you can really pretty much do what you want, and we'll give you money for the shoots. So I was able to approach editors and say, right, you can do what you want, and I'll give you a budget to go on location and shoot. And we had Alistair Mackey, Camille Biddo-Waddington, Nancy Roder, Kathy Castrine worked for us, and we started gathering photographers as well, which was exciting. Photographers who were threatened that they wouldn't then work for other titles if they worked for us, and they did choose to work for us.
Why do you think that was?
Because we were giving them an opportunity to sort of do what they wanted, and we were also trying to do something a bit like this, which was, I think in this situation it seems that instead of a formal interview, there's something more personal. That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to work with photographers that we knew, so it was almost like a group of people, and then we'd work with models that we knew, or designers. Or bring in artists who we knew. So it was about trying to make things more personal and less distant, and give the reader more of a sense of the person.
It's interesting, just going back to what we were talking about before though, because do you feel that working environments like that, or even like working cultures like that, or even like titles like The Face, could they exist anymore? Because I know ID's still around, but it is very different in the way that you know, British Vogue is very different now.
I don't think they need to exist anymore, because you've got other magazines. Not that I read other magazines, but Self-Service is there, Purple is there. You know, I'm sure there are other magazines that are current, and they're doing what they're doing now. You know, there's no reason to bring The Face back, and Nova really shouldn't have been called Nova. I think there was no point really in bringing that title back. We should have just started a new magazine.
Sure.
But I think they bought the title and the sort of idea of strong women, and what they were discussing was similar to what Nova had tried to do at the time. So that worked, but I think it was a mistake to really try and dig up an old magazine and start it again.
It's interesting you say, you know, they don't need to exist. You know, there's new things that kind of appeal to what people are after. But one thing that I'm fascinated by at the moment is that kind of the climate of nostalgia. And you know, you must have noticed it yourself if you go online and you go on all these new channels. You go on Instagram or you go on Tumblr, and young people are sort of tirelessly posting imagery of that period that we were talking about when you were starting out, from people like yourself, people like Melanie. Is that strange in any ways? Do you want, because there's such a climate of it, even young designers, people who are referencing sort of, you know, that aesthetic, or referencing the 90s.
I don't know why that is. I mean, I think every decade is reference, isn't it? So it's not like the 90s is going to go on forever. It just happens to be the 90s. It could be the 60s. You know, we saw a lot of 60s stuff, or we see 40s coming through, or you know, and now is the 90s. And when you look at all the shows that have just been in Paris, it's almost like sort of flashback, isn't it, to the long skirts and the leather knee-high boots and the scarves and the military coats and the felt and the buttons, and I don't know why. It's just a moment now. Maybe it's a reaction to sort of having short skirts and vulgarity. Maybe it's at the moment it's quite a vulnerable time and fragile time. I don't know if people want to feel protected again, because it is very protective, all that sort of big army felt and long skirts, and it's and I think it is quite empowering for women. You feel quite strong, and you don't feel like you're dressing for anybody else. I feel like women, when they dress like that, they're dressing because they feel good like that.
I think that's maybe what I was trying to get at when I said that I didn't feel you have a type of girl, because I think there's something about it is more about an attitude sometimes than an aesthetic, and about that kind of sense of dressing for yourself, which there's an irony to that because it's a fashion image, but do you think that is always important, that the girl looks like she would be in that situation and she would have chosen that bag, and it's about the individual rather than a general sort of trend or look?
I think it's entirely about that, it's about the strength of that girl, and it's about a directness, and it's the sort of girl I like, the sort of woman that I like. I don't like a woman that's constantly touching up her makeup or worrying about her hair or not able to go on a protest because she's got heels on. I like women who are quite tomboyish, I suppose. I don't like a precious woman, so I think the women that I'm conveying aren't like that, and they're not going to sort of be defined by what they're wearing. They're going to define it, and they're going to choose the clothes. They're not going to be worn by the clothes.
And tell me, is that part, because you have collaborated with different designers at different points, and one of the ones that I want to talk particularly about is Marc Jacobs, because obviously he had a really a major role there. You started, you met in 1997, and then you were creative director from 2001, and was that part of what you were trying to do there, was to bring that idea of a woman and bring what you were working on your imagery into the actual kind of commercial side of fashion where that could be sold, or was it just more of a meeting of, was it a friendship?
I think it was a meeting of minds, I think we liked the same sort of girl, and we agreed on, we had similar taste, I think, similar vision at that time. And the girls had that energy and that attitude, and casting was important for Marc at that time as well, and who he had on the catwalk, and they would be his girls. And I think with Marc Jacobs and Marc by Marc at that time, everyone wanted to be that Marc by Marc girl or that Marc Jacobs girl.
Is that why he's been such a successful designer, do you think?
I don't know really. I think he's a brilliant designer. He's brilliant at fabric and print and mixing fabrics, and he's a perfectionist, and he drives himself to the limit. And he knows all those references, but he's very good at fusing them together, or sort of finding a thread for himself through it. And he's very good with colour. He's very good with the textures. He's pretty good.
He's just good.
Yeah, he's quite good.
And tell me about working with him, and because some of the, I think some of the things that people would define as very, very Marc Jacobs, I think came out of that working relationship in that period that you were there. So it was a really pivotal time, I guess, for him and for you. Things like, you introduced him to Jürgen Teller, who he worked with for a long time, as we talked about before, and just tell me about establishing those codes and working out who he was. Do you see yourself in a lot of what he does still?
Some collections I do. I think the last collection that he did, the one he just showed, seemed to be a bit of a retrospective of things that he'd done over the past, and he there were some sort of old favourites in it, and it was really beautiful collection, I thought. I think there was a time when he was maybe wanting to sort of move fashion forward and be more experimental, and I think at that moment I felt a bit lost with where we were going, but for a long time I think we were very close, and we worked I did a lot of days there. I'd spend a lot of time doing research and going through print archives, and it was a tiny room. There was me and Marc and Aisling Ludden, who still works with him, and we'd just be in a tiny room working through it. So it was a very sort of intimate time, and it was great.
Is it hard parting ways with someone? I know you haven't completely parted ways, but is it hard sort of moving on when you've had such a collaborative relationship with someone, whether it's Marc or whether it's someone like Jürgen? It must be strange, I mean, purely from a creative perspective.
Yeah.
To kind of, there must be an element of almost pressing reset a little bit and having to re-establish who you are.
Yes. Well, I think I've been really lucky because nothing's stopped before its time. So I know when I was in the middle of working with Marc, if we'd stopped working together, it would have been very upsetting. But it's been 17 years now. And I think when I stopped doing mainline, it was just a natural moment that it was just a natural moment. So it was positive for both of us. I started doing more photography and he started exploring other things. And so no, it didn't feel at all sad or negative. It felt good, and it felt like a good new start. And the same with Jürgen, I think. We'd done it. It wasn't like something breaking off midway. It felt very complete, and it felt like we'd created this body of work, and we'd done it, and it was good. And I never would have picked up a camera, I don't think, if we hadn't stopped working together. Sure. And it was good for both of us. It was a great release for him, and I think it was a time for me to sort of stand on my feet and not hide behind him all the time. So no, actually it's been really positive, and I think things do, even with the Vogue days ending, I'm not very good at ending things, so all those things actually push me on in a positive way.
Catalysts in a way.
Sorry?
They're catalysts for new things in a way.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
I want to talk about the photography because we talked a lot about you as a stylist, but you are an image maker in so many ways, and since 2005, as you say, you've focused an awful lot on photography. What made you want to do? Because I think it's quite a daring thing to do. Fashion, people get very set in their boxes in a way. You're a stylist, or you're a designer, or you're this, and
yeah.
Was it hard in any ways to make that transition, and what sparked it?
Well, I think when I stopped working with Jürgen, I worked with different people, and it was just never the same collaboration in a way, I think, because I wasn't able to bring so much to the shoot, or they weren't used to somebody bringing so much to the shoot, so it was sort of annoying. I think it was sort of annoying for some photographers to have somebody sort of pushing their view and saying, I want it like this, I didn't see it like that, I saw it like this, and I'd be literally sort of on their shoulder there. Yeah, really annoying. And it was frustrating for me that what I'd imagined wasn't what was happening necessarily. So I had my assistant Beth Fenton was working with me, and she just said, you've just got to pick up the camera and just do it. And then it seemed very natural because I'd always done set the thing up anyway. I'd always found the location and found the model and sort of directed hair and makeup and found the clothes. So just to have the camera in my hands, it didn't seem that big a jump. I think it was just, it's more about the confidence of just going for it and jumping in there, isn't it?
It's interesting. It's a tricky question in a way, but I think you know, having got to that point, as you say, where you're so not so confident in the vision, but so sure in what you want to create, and where, as we talked about, your work's had such an impact. Have you ever got to a point where you felt like a kind of a big part of the fashion industry and very much an insider? Because it seems like in the what we were talking about at the start, what helped it was so natural, and you were kind of your own little unit. And have you always tried to maintain a kind of healthy distance from?
I haven't really tried to keep a distance, but I've tried to just do the work, I guess, and concentrate on making images and not be involved in the politics or sort of, I don't know. I prefer not to get it. I don't particularly like going to meetings or being involved in the politics of setup, so I've stayed quite independent. But not in any way because I don't like the fashion business, or I've got great lifelong friends who've been in the business, so I don't know.
It is what it is. And tell me, one of the things, it must be strange in a way, I think a lot of image makers, it's strange to look back through your archive and back through your pictures, because you do kind of, you know, it's your life in some ways, and you can...
It is your life.
Yeah,
it
but
gobbles
that must
you
be...
up. It definitely...
Yeah.
There's no work-life divide in this. It's... it takes over your life for sure. It matters, and it matters hugely, probably too much.
But that must be even more so for you, where it is the girl, and in some ways, as you said, that girl is you. Do you not feel like it's almost like your autobiography, you've lived your life and you've written your life, you've told your life through pictures?
And your life goes sort of, you get pictures back and you're not happy with them, and then you're not happy, and in life it can send you into a sort of trough of for weeks, and then you have one that comes back and you're pleased with it, and then you're really happy. So that's not great really, because it dictates your moods, you know, a lot, but it is what it is. I mean, we've had a great life through it, seen so many places and met fantastic people, and so it's fine, but there's definitely no work life divide, I don't think, if you're passionate about it.
But do you think that lack of divide, the fact that you do pour yourself into it, it's a very hard question to answer, because I'm going to ask kind of why people like your work, but do you think that's why people identify with it, and they're especially identifying, as we talked about kind of today, and they will continue to, because there is that visible emotion there?
I think they do, yeah. And people who aren't sort of don't know about fashion, I think they do like the pictures because they sort of do feel something.
Is it hard for you looking at them ever? Does it remind you of ways you felt?
Not really, no.
I'm interested.
No, not really. Because it's never sort of so literally me. It's bits of me, but or it could be something someone that I would like to be more of. So, you know, they're imaginary characters, and sure they have bits of you, but it's definitely not me entirely out there. And actually the blonde girl is sort of the opposite. You know, she's like my ideal. She's me at my best, but she's definitely not me at the most of the time.
Do you think you'll always chase her?
Because she's easygoing, you know, and she's just like, everything's fine, and she'll let it go, and that's, you know, yeah, maybe I'll chase her. Maybe I'll be her one day. Just.
Venetia Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.